Okay, in this video, I just want to take a couple of minutes just to give you a reminder or an update on navigating around the scene in Blender, adding, removing objects, and transforming objects. So I'm going to delete my sphere. So I'm going to hit X to delete. So first of all, adding objects. So Shift A will add. So I'm going to go to Mesh, and just to demonstrate navigating around the scene, I'm going to add in the monkey object. The reason I'm adding in this monkey object is because if I go to the front view, and there's a few ways we can do that, we can click on our navigation icon at the top right hand corner here. We can click and drag on this to orbit around our scene. We can click on any of these little circles to get a particular view, and you can see the screen will change that view. The easier way to navigate around a scene is actually using the number pad. So just to go through some of those hotkeys, we have key number 1, which is our front view, key number 3 for our right view, and key number 7 for our top view. Now going back to the front view, if we hit number 9 at any time, we'll flip our view 180 degrees. So we went from our front to our back, and we can go back to our front. Again, that's just by hitting 9. We'll go to our top view, and then we can switch to our bottom view, and our right view, switching to our left view. We also have keys 4 and 6 let us orbit around, and I believe it's a 15-degree increment we use to spin around there. We can also use 8 and 2 to do that in a more vertical way, in this case around the x-axis. We can use number 5 to switch between orthographic and perspective views. So you can see it looks like our model's changing, but it's actually just the way we're looking at our model. So if I rotate this so we can see our grid lines on the screen, you can see that all our lines remain parallel. This is because we're in orthographic view. We've taken away any perspective from this view. So if I hit 5, we can go back to perspective view, and you can see everything is reacting more as it does in the real world, with all these parallel lines kind of converging towards themselves as we go towards the horizon. Other very basic navigation that we've looked at before, we've got the middle mouse button, which we click and drag around to rotate around our scene. We have holding Shift and using the middle mouse button to pan around our scene, and rolling the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. If we have an object in our scene somewhere that's selected, and it doesn't matter where it is in our scene, we'll move that way off. We can hit period on the number pad to zoom directly into that. It can be incredibly useful. I'm going to just switch back to perspective mode. I'm going to add a few more objects into my scene. Let's just add a cone. And this is in the same position as our monkey. Let's move that. So I'm going to select it with left click. I'm going to hit G on the keyboard, and that is our hotkey for moving an object. So I'm just going to move that off to the side, and you can see we've kind of just moved that based on the view and the camera. So if I hit G again, move it up, it's moved up. If we want to move an object on any particular axis, we can lock that to an axis. So I'm going to hit A again. I'm just going to go to, let's go with a cube, basic default cube. This time I'm going to hit G, and I'm going to then hit X. Now bear in mind at the bottom of the screen, we actually have a whole list of all the hotkeys that we can use at this particular moment. So you can see the third hotkey along is X-axis. If I hit X, you can see that now I am locked to that X-axis. I can only move it along that direction. I can click that there. I'll hit G again. This time I've not hit another hotkey. This time what I'll do is I'll hit Shift X, and now we have locked it along the X axis where it won't move in X. It will only move in Z and Y. And this means that if we have an object placed on a surface, in fact that's a really good example. Let's just add a plane very quickly here. So at this point I'm going to scale up this plane. Now you can use scale using the hotkey S, and just bear in mind that in the bottom right hand side of the viewport you can see any hotkey that I press any time throughout this course. Let's say I have my object placed exactly where I want it to be on a surface, and I want to move it without going through that surface. I can hit G, I can hit Shift Z, and now I can only move it along that surface. And that can be very useful. Other very useful hotkeys that we'll be using, we have S to scale an object. So this is just a uniform scale. We're just making the object bigger or smaller, and you can see our gizmo is quite simple. As we get further away from the origin, it will get bigger. As we get closer to it, it will get smaller. I'm just going to hit Ctrl Z to undo. Again, another useful hotkey. The one thing that is very useful is if you're scaling something and you start your mouse very, very close to it, you can make it get really, really big. But it can be very, very difficult to make it smaller because you're already so close to that origin. If we start very far away from the object, hit S, now we have a lot more control over scaling it down. That's another useful tip that you keep in mind. And again, with scale, we can also lock to a particular axis. So at the moment, we're not locked to an axis. We'll hit X and we can lock to a particular axis. Next hotkey is R. R rotates our objects. Now you can see in this particular case, we are rotating based entirely on the view from the camera. So we're just rotating that based on our view. We can hit R and hit X again, and now we are rotating along that X axis. You can see we have that red line, and imagine just sticking a skewer directly through your object and spinning that skewer. That's exactly what we're doing. We can do the same thing with Z. We can do the same thing with Y. Okay, challenge time. Now that I've shown you quite a few hotkeys for navigating around the scene, changing the view, I want you to familiarise yourself with moving around in the 3D view using those hotkeys and using the mouse. Now, once you do that, you should be able to add and delete some primitive objects just using that Shift-A add menu. Add those to your scene, and then I want you to practice moving, scaling and rotating those objects and just create something really simple, a really simple model. It can be just a few blocks stacked on top of each other. You could create something a little bit more interesting. So have a go at that. Pause the video, take a few minutes to try that out, and when we come back, I'll show you what I came up with. Okay, so I hope you had fun doing that little challenge there and you were able to create something. So I'm just going to give you a quick idea of how I would approach a small challenge like this, just using the very basic hotkeys that I've just shown you. So again, I'm just going to make sure that my hotkeys are shown up on the screen. Start those up. And let's just do a toy train. So a classic toy train. So what do we have? We have cube, first of all. We are going to scale this down in Z, get it flatter, and then I'm going to scale it in X to make it long. So this is going to be the basis of my cube. Just scale that down a little bit more. Okay, now what do I need? I need a cylinder. So this is going to be the main body of the train. So I want to rotate this first of all, and I'm going to rotate it in X by 90 degrees. That turns it on its side. Now I want to scale that down. So I'm going to scale this down, and you can see that it gets smaller and shorter at the same time. Move this up a little bit. Put it about here. Now I want to scale it, but what axis do I want to scale it on? I want to make it as long as this. So you can tell from this green line that I'm actually on the Y axis. I'm going to hit scale. S for scale and then Y to scale that up. And I think I maybe need to make it just a little bit bigger. And scale that back down on Y so we're at the same length. Now I think I want something kind of round on the end of that. So let's try and add sphere. So we have two types of spheres, ecospheres and UV spheres. Doesn't really matter in this case what we're going to use. I would just go with an ecosphere. And this is very, very blocky, so I'm going to give it some subdivisions. Now, one thing you'll notice is when we add objects to our scenes, we often get this additional little option menu that allows us to do some different things. And I can actually rotate and scale directly in here as well. I can move objects, move this up a little bit. And this is one very simple way of moving an object in your scene, just using the interface without having to go into hotkeys. Now, sometimes it's not super easy to do. We'll just go with something like that. Now, that is too big, so let's reduce that down a little bit. And I think that's a good first attempt. Now, I do want to make it a little bit flatter. Let's scale this down. And we want to scale it in Y. That a little bit flatter. Now, the part that's hidden, we don't really have to worry about that. Now, what else do we need? We need some wheels on the side of this. Now, we've already got this sphere, so let's just copy this across. So how do we copy? Shift D will allow us to copy an object. And now I want to rotate that, and we've accidentally went into camera view, so you maybe have noticed that we have number pad 0. Takes us into our camera view. Rotate around again. So we're going to hit rotate R, 90 degrees in Y, no, in Z. Get this side on, and let's just move this into place on our object. So we want a couple of these, so there's one. We'll move this out a little bit. Let's take this one, Shift D. We want to move this along the Y-axis. I know that's perfectly in line with that. Let's select them both, so we're going to hold Shift and click on the second one. Shift D again to duplicate. And this time I want to lock to the X-axis. Now you can see as I duplicate an object, it automatically puts me into move mode. So then I can just hit X and move this into place. So probably around about there that I want these. Okay, so I was a little bit off. A little bit. And again, this is just supposed to be a simple kind of fake little toy train. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Now I need another cube. Let's scale this down a little bit. Move it up. And let's move it back a little bit. And there we go. A very, very simple little toy train. In the next video, we're going to move on and we're going to add some shaders to this object. So I'll see you in the next video.